Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello and welcome, everyone, to the show. I thought you'd like to know this, too. I'm your special guest today, Michael Horn, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. I have a wonderful guest on the line today, Deacon Dennis Lambert. He is from the Diocese of Phoenix. I'm just going to read a quick biography of Deacon Dennis, and we'll just get to know his story. So Deacon Dennis Lambert and his wife, Debbie, live in Phoenix, Arizona, where he serves as a deacon in the Roman Catholic Diocese of Phoenix. A graduate of Lake Forest College and the Keno Catechetical Institute, Deacon Dennis recently retired from a 29-year career in the pharmaceutical industry in order to dedicate more time to his writing and to serving the church. In addition to his passion for writing, Deacon Dennis and his wife share a deep love of music and have performed together in bands both in the Chicago and Phoenix areas for almost 3 decades. And for more information, you can visit https://DennisLambert-writer.com for Deacon Dennis's website. So if you'd like more information, that is the link that you can go to find out more about his writings and more about his work. So Deacon Dennis, how you doing today?
Very good. How are you, Michael?
Good. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'm looking forward to our interview. The topics that we're going to talk about today are certainly your writing and just kind of your ministry as a deacon for sure, and any evangelical efforts, especially talks that you're giving. So those are kind of going to be the 3 main segments that we have today. And so I just want to kind of dive right in. So there's this great book that's out there called The Table that you have written. And I just want to start with your thoughts on kind of what inspired you to write the book, The Table, and just if you could give kind of our listeners just an overview about the plot of The Table.
Sure. Well, I mean, when I think back, what prompted me to write this, I can recall a question popping in my head. I don't know where I was or what was happening when it did, but I got to thinking maybe it was the gospel reading that day was this gospel of the centurion who Jesus went and healed his daughter. And of course, that's where we get from Scripture the line, "Lord, I'm not worthy for you to enter under my roof, only say the word," et cetera, et cetera. So I wondered what happened to this centurion after that interaction with Christ. Was he transformed? And so I thought to myself, that could be a story right there. But I did a little research first and found that there was actually a tradition on that centurion. So there's already stuff kind of out there, holy tradition, sacred tradition, or how we want to call it, about this man. So I just thought, well, okay, let me make up a fictitious centurion and kind of go from there. So that was kind of the basis, for my story, what prompted it, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And as you kind of wrote this story here, can you tell us just a little bit more about kind of the plot, what's going on? So you gave us kind of the basics of what inspired that, the fascinating story. But what is the book about?
Yeah, sure. It's 2 stories kind of in one that end up intersecting, I would say, in a very unexpected way. So there's 2 stories. The first story in the front end is about a table. Imagine that, a book called The Table about a table. But this table, Michael, was no ordinary table. It was built by the grandfather of Jesus. The story then follows the table from its construction all the way to current times, right to today. And I would say that's one nicely or strongly built table, wouldn't you say, right? Mm-hmm. Made it all that time. So I'm going to work on my humor. It's only going to get better during this interview, Michael. I promise you. So anyway, in the story, we see Jesus encounter the table on several occasions. As a kid, he plays underneath it, just like I did my parents' tables when I was a kid, making a fort out of it. That table appears at the wedding feast of Cana, and then again, sadly, at his scourging. Then after the death of Jesus, the apostles appoint a former centurion, the centurion, named Cornelius, who becomes what they call the table's first table bearer. Part of the story is afterwards, the apostles realized the significance of the table because Jesus had introduced it to them. So they knew about this table, and they charged Cornelius within the early missions to bring that table to the various apostles who have now dispersed and started spreading the gospel. So armed with this mission, Cornelius and his descendants from then on carry it out, being in charge or kind of delivering this table to people in need, all the way up to current times. So in that process, the table brings peace and healing to those who encounter it. That's kind of part one. The second story is that of a character set in modern times, Michael Fortunato. He's a man in his early 30s living, again, present day. At the very moment of his breakthrough in the music industry, Michael loses the only thing that really ever matters to him, and that was his wife, Debbie. That loss sends Michael into a tailspin, center of darkness that he just can't escape. That is until he meets the current table bearer, who happens to be an autistic young man named Anthony. He meets Anthony at table in a story that is over 2,000 years old. And you'll have to read the rest to find out what happens. But that's kind of the story. Two stories in one, kind of converging there at the end.
Absolutely. I love it. Fascinating themes in there. Just a follow-up question on kind of looking at the plot of this and kind of what inspired you to write this story about the table. Just generally, I mean, we've all read books, whether it's fiction, nonfiction even, kind of encompass parts of our opinion on various historical events or that sort of thing. But what authors generally write from some sort of base of experience that they have, whether it's in a certain field or a certain experience that they can connect with, that sort of thing. So what elements of the table in particular, so the story that you just kind of outlined for us, what parts of that story kind of stem from your own experience?
Well, good question. Well, we can rule out anything to do with the centurion. I was never a centurion, nor was I ever a soldier. But what I can identify with a lot the character of Michael, as you mentioned in your gracious introduction. I am a musician. My wife and I have been, she's a singer, and I'm a bass player. I've been playing music together for, almost 30 years. I don't even want to add it up because then I realize how old I'm getting. But we've been doing it professionally. By that I mean we get paid when we perform, but not that we're like making a living at it. So it's more for fun. And through that, we played at some wonderful places and events throughout the years. But perhaps my greatest musical claim to fame, if you will, is that I've had the privilege of playing with both Tom Booth and Matt Maher on many occasions as I actually played in the same choir with them at St. Timothy's in Mesa, Arizona. So it's like, yeah, I played with Matt Maher, and people are really impressed with that because most people know who he is. But in short, much of the insight into the musical end of the story indeed comes from my own insights and, I guess you could say, aspirations. And like similar to the story and the character of Michael, I had a backup job, a day job, and again, I drew upon my experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and that happened to have been Michael's day job as well. So just kind of drawing on those things. And I guess one little tidbit is, again, I do describe it in the book there, how Michael meets his wife, and the reality is that's exactly how I met my wife in what I call a single blind date in high school. She knew who I was, but I knew who she was, but she didn't know who I was. And once again, if you want that tasty tidbit, I'm going to have to make you buy the book.
You are good. No, this is excellent. These are amazing experiences. Yeah, to write on it, to inspire you, kind of to write a book that has these similar features and everything. I think it's amazing. So thank you for talking a little bit about that. Just kind of looking back again as you wrote this book, kind of based on your experiences, what inspired you, your thoughts, and that sort of thing. Just a question about what sort of obstacles or what challenges did you encounter while you were writing this book, if any?
Oh, yeah. No, it was easy sailing. I just wrote this book. It got published, and, now I'm sitting large, on a bank of money. Again, I promise you, maybe my humor will get better. No, but truly, like any author, the greatest hurdle that I encountered was getting the book published. And what was unique for me was that my work, which I guess could be best termed as Catholic fiction, was operating within a subgenre of a subgenre. What I mean by that is that there's this very small yet hopefully emerging genre of Christian Catholic fiction is really a tiny part of that larger market known as Christian fiction, which in turn is a subgenre, of course, of the greater fiction category. The truth of the matter, though, Michael, is that there are very, very few Catholic publishers that are handling fiction. I mean, there's plenty of Catholic publishers, but they're doing spirituality, theology, life of the saints. Very, very few are doing fiction. In fact, if you actually sat down and Googled Catholic publishers who have fiction, who do fiction, you'd be lucky to get 5 hits. And then even if you go to some of those, you might get more. It may lead you to others, but many of them aren't even in existence anymore. It's just that and if you then go on and Google Catholic literary agents, you'll come up with 0 as far as fiction, Catholic fiction literary agents. There's none. Now, if you were to substitute the word Catholic with Christian, you'd get a ton of publishers. You'd get a ton of literary agents. What this means is that, I guess, currently the widest road to publication of any faith-based story is through a Christian or a Protestant literary agent or publishers. This was kind of the obstacles that I faced, and like most aspiring authors, I queried my work hard and heavy to a number of literary agents and publishers alike, and again, both secular and non-secular. And like most aspiring authors, I would receive one rejection after rejection. My son is now writing. He just finished a book, and it's really, really good. It's not faith-based at all. But I chuckle at him because he's like getting so, what's the word I want to use? Not upset, but can't believe he's getting so many rejections. And I just laugh and say, son, it's going to take a lot before you get that yes. But anyways, that's kind of a sidebar. But I would get rejection after rejection, and that was okay. And they would generally be, polite, saying it's something in fact that why it's not their cup of tea. It might be someone else's, et cetera, et cetera. Then one day out of the blue, I received honest feedback, not just that kind of nicely put and thanks but no thanks letter. And this was from one of the better known Christian literary agents. By Christian, again, I mean Protestant. And actually, I got a little clip. I got the email in front of me. This is what he wrote to me. He said, "Unfortunately, your story setting and main character are so thoroughly Catholic that your typical Christian publisher would turn it down. I currently represent a Catholic author," he mentions the author, "and her collections of rescue stories," she names the book, "but I had to ask her not to identify her as Catholic in these stories."
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. Crazy.
So basically, he went on to ask me if I'd be willing to edit out all things Catholic in the book, and that he would take me on. My very polite response was thanks, but no thanks. And also just within the story, it's not this profound hit somebody over the head with Catholic faith, 101, it's not a treatise on the faith. It just happens to be the characters are Catholic and things like that. So even after that, after 7 months of heavy querying, I received 2 offers. One of them was from a Christian publisher who said they loved my story. The other said that it reminded her of the War Room, but she basically said that she would love to publish it once again if I took everything Catholic out of it. And she was very polite about it. She said, "I would totally understand being a member," and she names her church. That if someone asked me to that, I don't think I would take too well to it. But to this publisher's last point, there is just no reference to what specific denomination or character are in these stories. With her church, she said, at least these stories here, you don't know what church it is. The point I was trying to make there is, well, that may be true. The Protestant denominations are very, very similar. The Catholic Church is definitely different and stuff like that. So not to mention within a Protestant book like The War Room, what church it is the characters are at doesn't really make too much difference. You know what I'm saying? It's pretty sublime anyways.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. No, I agree. And that kind of leads your synopsis kind of on your struggles with getting it published by a Catholic publisher and kind of the struggles with kind of working just through a Christian market. And that's the thing that bothers me. I talk to my students about this sometimes, about how the word Christian now, like basically almost in society today, the word Christian almost means not Catholic. Like, and that's messed up. Like, it's like, because when people say, like, I'm Catholic, I'm not, and then people say, like, oh, I'm Christian. I'm like, yeah, we're Christians too as Catholics. Like, we're the originals. Like, and so that's what I think. It's a struggle, because when you use the word Christian now, like, oftentimes people think of like a mega church setting, and like they forget, like, no, like the original Christians that like worship Jesus Christ present in the Eucharist, and like the hierarchy of the church, and these like essential concepts that the fathers talk about. So I don't want to get on a tangent on that, but I think that's a great point that you mentioned about how like we just need to recover that sense of like Christianity is Catholicism. That's what it is in its fullness. And so you touched on that difficulty of the publishing, and so I want to follow up on that just with kind of like two questions kind of mixed into one. And so kind of your views on the current state of Catholic fiction, and if you've noticed any changes in that state of Catholic fiction after your book was published eventually. Like, so just what are your thoughts kind of on the state of Catholic fiction kind of as it was? And I know you talked about that a little bit,
Sure.
But have you noticed any changes kind of in the last couple of years about any improvements or any progress in that realm?
Yes, well, good question, and it actually just really dovetails nicely off what you're saying there, Michael, just about that split thinking about Christianity and Catholicism not being a part of it, which of course is maddening, because again, the church, where the church starts, with the Catholic Church, and I understand and I can appreciate it. I don't want to go off too far on a tangent on my own, but when I was a young man and when I thought I knew anything and everything, I had my treaties against the church. Here's the problem. Here's what all these issues, all these problems. So I took a detour, so to speak, for a couple of years. Again, instead of bringing, my questions about the church to the church, I made the mistake of going, let's say, on a detour to the right, to an evangelical church. And, a few years there, the answers weren't there. They certainly weren't there. They weren't lasting. And I finally went back to the Catholic Church with my questions to a Jesuit priest, sat down, and been here ever since. And I think the Lord has maybe provided that detour so I can be more open and understanding to Protestants and their thoughts, and again, helping to explain to them about the church. So, which leads me back to the question at hand. Has there been some change? I think as a whole, I've been seeing a change to more of an ecumenism, where we look for what we have in common versus what we don't have in common. And even going back to, I mentioned Matt Maher, back when he broke through, it was almost unthinkable. And I'll get back to your question here in a second, your stated question. But if you think about the fact that Matt Maher, highly Catholic, great musician, I don't know how long it's been, time flies with you, but 10 years ago, to think that a Catholic artist would be playing on K-Love, and now is bigger than big, nominated for 9 Grammys in the Christian music category, you would have thought, there's no way that's going to happen, and that's happening. So to me, there is hope. Now, sure. as far as my views on the current state of Catholic fiction, Catholic fiction is but a blip on the larger fiction landscape. While countless fiction titles come out monthly, there are very, very few Catholic publishers who put out inspirational works of fiction. Thank you, Enroute Books and Media, who is one that does. Yeah. So the real question becomes: is there really a need for it? So if it's not out there, is there really a need for it? Is there an audience who really wants it and is ready to gobble it up? I think we have to really ask that question. And the pragmatist might say that if there was a demand, then certainly the market, which always responds to demand, would accommodate it. So therefore, one could conclude that Catholics must not be interested in purchasing stories centered on Catholic characters. I mean, that's one point of view. I believe, however, that there's confounding variables to that throw some wrenches into that argument. One of them, Michael, is the response that since there largely hasn't been fictional stories available which feature Catholic characters, those Catholics interested in such books default and automatically or become accustomed to purchasing the bounty of faith-based fiction that's being provided by our Protestant brothers and sisters. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating thing, well, there's nothing out there, so I'm going over here, and I become accustomed to that. This has been, the long-standing problem. In fact, you may be too young, but I remember in the early 80s to the 90s, it seemed like there was this series of books called the Joshua books. They were written by a Catholic priest named Father Joseph Gerzon. And these books, I used to gobble them up. They were, they told the fictional story of a man who clearly represented Jesus, named Joshua, who would show up in modern times and would lead everyone in his path with a renewed faith. I loved reading these stories. But sadly, when I actually sit back and think about it now, I can't recall any of these stories having a setting within a Catholic environment. But I do remember stories that took place in Protestant churches. And here, this is, again, one of our own writing these stories, and for whatever reason, the Catholic faith isn't represented at all. So if I were being optimistic and responding to the question of what is the current state of Catholic fiction, I may respond that it's emerging. And this is true. More Catholic publishers than ever now are putting out works of fiction, but still that's a very, very minuscule number. I mean, they're just really, I could count 5 on my hand now if I tried to rattle them off. And if you're a Catholic author and you go to query, one of these publishers, more times than not, at least half of them aren't even taking, submissions at this point. So to me, the real question is, if they build it, will they come? If more Catholic publishers put out more Catholic fictions, and if those books found their way within the same distribution channels of the more popular Christian fiction books, would the genre take off? I would like to know. In the meantime, I keep on writing. I encourage my fellow Catholic writers to do the same. So, has anything changed? Yeah, I'm happy to report it is. I mean, I did not see this coming. But when I wrote my next book, actually I have a couple in the queue, so to speak. I started querying again, just like I did before. I wasn't defeated. I kept querying the Christian literary agents, and lo and behold, I ended up with I counted myself so lucky that in the same week I got responses from 2 literary agents, both from the top end Christian literary agencies, asking to see my full book, to send in the full manuscript. And then one of them, an agency called Heartline, took me on. So I'm now represented by one of the larger Christian, literary agencies that there are, one of the biggest and the best. So I got to kind of go back a little bit and just broaden out here that, again, you never say never, that this particular agent, her name is Linda, and this agency saw past the fact that okay, it's Catholic or whatever, but what is the story telling? Is it still a good story, and things like that? So here I am now, and I'm happy to report that again, that the biases I encountered, at least now through these people and stuff like that, seems to be not there, or at least I found a little niche in, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. No, thank you very much for that. Yeah, because I was curious myself, just kind of how we're doing with things with, like you said, when I was introduced to En Route Books and Media 2 years ago, I was just basically aware of just probably 3 or 4 other Catholic publishing companies that publish things. I mean, you look at like Ignatius Press is a huge one, obviously, but it's not. I mean, that's the one you hear about, Ignatius Press. Like that's a legitimately Catholic publisher. Like that's what you know. But yeah, it's good to kind of know what outlets are there and continue to grow them. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And if I could, Michael, real quick, Michael, because first of all, you're right, Ignatius. That is the biggest one. But before we go on, I feel obligated, from the bottom of my heart, just to show my appreciation to En Route Books and Media, and to Sebastian who heads it there. I mean, he gave me this chance, but he also was the one to encourage me to look beyond, for a bigger outlet. So I wouldn't want anyone to think, that, I went to look for an agent. Why am I not happy at En Route or anything else? No, it was through Sebastian's nurturing and desire to, see if I could even find some bigger outlets and some bigger channels, for my work to do so. So it's through his encouragement. guidance and everything else. So I am very much, indebted to him and to En Route. So I just want to make sure everyone knew that class organization, class person leading it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, definitely they do fantastic work. Just on the last note on this topic, on your writings, especially about the table and kind of Catholic fiction, Deacon, I was just going to ask you if you're working on anything else right now that you care to share just a little bit about. You don't need to go into a ton of detail, but anything else that you're any other books that you've had or anything like that, any work that's going on?
Yeah. So the first thing, the biggest thing I'm working right now on is patience and humility.
Sure.
Again, it's been a few years since the table has been published, and I've actually completed two other novels, two other works of fiction that my agent is trying to get, purchased by a publisher. I've had a couple of really close calls by. One of them was an imprint from the largest publisher, Penguin Imprint, and another from Tyndale. Went all the way to what they call editorial review, where it went through everything to a final, conference room, yes or no, and it was a no. But that gave me encouragement. So it's just a matter now of being patient to find the right opportunity out there. But I have, like I say, two books that are available now to be published, and again, I gotta to be patient there. And of course, to remain humble and to keep in mind really what I want to achieve with all my work, and that's hopefully to inspire people to turn to a deeper and more meaningful relationship with Jesus. So that's kind of where I'm at there right now.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll shift to our second topic, which is your life as a deacon. So if you could just describe for us a little bit about kind of your life as a deacon, and what ministries you're involved with, and any challenges that you've faced since being ordained. So those three things, just kind of your life as a deacon, the ministries you're involved with, and any challenges that you've faced during this time.
Yeah, well, I've been ordained now 5 years, and what can I say? I am in love with my vocation. I feel so blessed. God calls everybody somewhere to something, to honor Him, to spread His faith and everything else. And again, all I can say, I'm one happy man that for whatever reason God called me to this vocation. And I'm just so thankful that He lets me serve this way. I certainly, right now in the Diocese of Phoenix, they have us deacons do kind of two ministerial works, that which you find in the church, and then also to find something outside the church. By the church, I mean our parish, So we have our ministries within our parish, and then we have a ministry or other ministries outside our parish. And within the parish, I'm involved with several things. I'm, again, at Corpus Christi Parish in Phoenix, a little suburb we call Ahwatukee. I serve as the spiritual advisor for St. Vincent de Paul. I've been a Vincentian for a number of years along with my wife, and we just love that whole aspect of helping those in need. I'm also blessed to be able to lead our men's ministry, the Men of St. Joseph. In fact, we have a meeting tonight. We're about to break into Bishop Barron's DVD series on the Mass. Can't wait for that. My wife and I also host what we call encounter groups, kind of like the small groups that you hear about, kind of emerging, where people get together. We have a potluck. We look at the scriptures for the next week. We break those apart, and then we definitely pray for each other. And I occasionally help out with RCIA and things along that way. So that's kind of my mainstays within the parish. Outside the parish, my ministry is working with hospice patients, and I feel very privileged to do that. It's such a blessing. I always, in that thing, people sometimes will say, Dennis, how can you meet? Don't you find it difficult to be with people that are sick? The reality is that are dying, and I don't look at it that way at all. I feel like, in a sense, in this ministry, I'm almost more like a thief, that I'm getting more out of it than I could ever give. And someone asked me to try to explain that once, and the only thing I could come up with is like that, when you're in a sacred space like that, I always say this, that I don't think God can be any more present to us than He is. God is God. He's eternally present. But I think when we get in moments such as encountering people who are suffering, who are looking for friendship, or just in need, that our hearts just open up, and that presence that is always out there then is allowed to more flow into our hearts. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think it's the biggest blessing in the world to be able to serve in that capacity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. Very good. Okay, so our last thing kind of that we like to talk about is certainly as a deacon and as just a faithful Catholic and kind of as a writer, you've obviously been involved in evangelical sort of work. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the talks that you give on the new evangelization and any endeavors in that realm just with your work for evangelization.
Absolutely. The new evangelization is something that I'm very passionate about. While there's already been countless books on the topic, homilies, presentations given on the topic, I still think that meaning of what the new evangelization is still remains I would say a mystery to most Catholics. Most Catholics I find are unclear as to what it is. More oftentimes they shut down when they hear the word evangelization, and they kind of like can't even carry on a little bit more about what is the new evangelization. There's something about that word that's scary because, again, people reflect back on some of their past experience with people who are evangelical, or the way sometimes Protestants evangelize, the guy standing on the street corner with a sandwich board, waving a Bible in the hand. Of course, evangelization is not that way. It's not intended to be that way. But this is the very reason I feel compelled to speak about the topic and to shed a little bit more light on it. There is such a need to really break it apart so people can get a true sense of what our call to evangelize really is and what it requires of us, because there's a lot of misunderstanding on that, and not only how to do it, but who to do it to. In the early days, centuries ago, and even up to the middle of the last 20th century, the word mission was used in place of evangelization because, again, mission was seen as people going out to these foreign lands where people had never heard of Jesus. So the people in the jungles in Asia, there was more corners of the world. And mission was something very special people carried on. The reality, Michael, today is, of course, through mass media, through transportation, most of the world, has been made aware of who Jesus is. Most. Again, there are still some places we need to reach out to in mission. But that's what the new evangelization is readdressing. St. John Paul the Great, is saying we need to focus on a target group that's really, really in need nowadays. And you don't have to look very far to find it. These are the people in our backyards. These are the people that stand outside the faith, and also the people that stand within our faith, who are a lot of times, personally present, physically present, but not internally present. So our call, with the new evangelization is not only how we do it, but to whom we do it. And again, we don't have to look far for those people. And when I talk on the topic too, I always recommend to the group Sherry Waddell's book, Forming Intentional Disciples.
Absolutely.
And when you look, have you read that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And just when we see the data on how many Catholics don't really have an authentic relationship with Jesus, that they're not just yet intentional disciples, it should crystallize in those that do to get fully on board and to immerse themselves in this new mission of the church, the new evangelization to reach out to those people who, while baptized, many of them still don't have that relationship with Christ that makes us authentic disciples. And then, of course, talking about the new ways of reaching out to people, a lot of times, the thing that I'm real fond of saying is, because people are scared away from evangelizing because they feel like they're not equipped, and that should not be the case. No, I'm not the shell answer man when it comes to, someone says, well, what about this? And, I'm not necessarily going to be able to bust out a Bible verse or whatever. Thank you for Catholic Answers and all those kind of things. But when we speak of able to speak from our own point of view about our own relationship, with the Savior, those are things that matter. And the one thing that I say that we all can do is to invite people. So even if you feel so ill-equipped, invite somebody to come to Mass, invite somebody to attend men's group, then let the Holy Spirit take over. So it's a topic I know it can get thick and everything else, but it's pretty straightforward. The new evangelization is something really all Catholics should be looking at, especially, again, if you are an intentional disciple. I'll leave with the topic with this quote unless you have another question. But this came from Pope Paul VI from his encyclical on the evangelization in the modern world. Pope Paul says, St. Paul says, finally, the person who has been evangelized goes on to evangelize others. Here lies the test of truth, the touchstone of evangelization. It is unthinkable that a person should accept the word and give himself to the kingdom without becoming a person who bears witness to it and proclaims it in turn.
Yeah. I love it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that document is fantastic. Yeah, Evangelii Nuntiandi, it's amazing. It's fantastic, filled with quotes about how relevant evangelization is for the world and how essential it is and that sort of thing. And you mentioned a topic earlier that we could do a whole other segment on, so I don't want to talk about it for too long. But how the shift generally, it's been a positive and a negative, I think, and I'm happy to know your thoughts on it too, Deacon, just about the idea of ecumenism. So you talk about ecumenism now, and it's certainly a positive thing that there are groups that are seeking to find common ground, especially among Christian denominations, and to find the common ground and the similarities that we have as believers. Very important. But I think there's also kind of a neglect, especially among Catholics, to seek to convert. And so I had a great friend who was just ordained a priest 2 years ago for the Diocese of Omaha, and he was giving this talk at a lecture. His paper was chosen to be presented, and it was fantastic. And he was just talking about that we need to have arguments, that we need to actually argue about issues, because there's a value in beginning with a common ground, but when you disagree fundamentally about essential topics, so things like baptism, the necessity of baptism for salvation, we can't just ignore those things. We can't ignore the sacraments. We can't ignore the understanding of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And so, yes, you can absolutely start that we're saved by faith through grace. Absolutely. We are saved by faith. But it doesn't ever says faith alone, right? So James talks to us about works, and we talk about the value of the sacraments, especially baptism and the Eucharist as the true flesh and the true blood of Christ. And so he was just saying it's time to have an argument. It's time to be not to be uncompassionate, but just to actually attack these issues and to hammer them out, and not just to avoid the elephant in the room. So I think that's where I stand on this, and I think a lot of Catholics stand with me that understand the importance of it, because it's not just kind of your truth, my truth, that sort of thing, we move on. But it's like you start with a common ground, like you said, so there's an ecumenical approach, but then you have to move to that next level of even intentional evangelization, which is let's talk about these issues that we disagree with and look at the scriptures and look at the tradition of the church and see why the church teaches what she does teach about these things. So there's got to be that second step, and I know Paul VI talks about that in that document about we have to seek to convert. We can't just stop with a pre-evangelization. We have to move forward to walking with people, accompanying them to that next step of full conversion to the Catholic faith. And so I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do agree with you. But again, I'll kind of say you've got to start. Everyone has to start somewhere, and the first most important thing in terms of getting into these discussions, arguments. Yes, arguments. When you actually define the word argument, there's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes people find the word, right up front, kind of aggressive or whatever. But
yes.
I mean, if you want to discuss these items, the first step always is to meet the person where they're at. You cannot have these conversations, these discussions, these arguments with anybody if you're not first have a relationship with them.
Right.
So to me, the first step in all this is definitely not, okay, well, your faith says this, show me where that is, and then we respond and we just go tit for tat back and forth.
Yeah.
Because again, we just only have to look at Jesus. Jesus is the example for everything. Who did he dine with? Prostitutes, tax collectors. And we can also draw parallels nowadays, too, to again, what we're seeing in the world today with not only amongst Christians, but, again, other faiths like Muslims. I mean, it sickens me, Michael, when I will look on Facebook, I'm all happy by some of these posts, and I'll just see people just just ripping into Muslims and just a lot of hate. Yes, they're off in their faith. Yes, I want them to come to know Christ. But is that going to draw anybody to the faith? Absolutely not. Is that going to attract a Muslim to want to know what it's like to be a Christian? No, it never is. And again, I look at the example of Jesus. Just look in the Bible. The Muslims of today really were the Samaritans back then. The Samaritans were one of the most despised ethnic groups there was. Jews would go out of their ways not to travel through Samaria. They would never associate with the Samaritans. The disciples and the Pharisees were all shocked, when Jesus would even associate with one. But 3 times in the Gospels, he interacts with the Samaritans, holds them up in the parable of the Good Samaritan, as puts them higher than the priests and everything else by what they've done. And then consider the woman at the well. He meets this woman, the Samaritan woman, which is definitely taboo, and then that interaction leads to what? She's not supposed to tell anything about Jesus. She runs there, and then Jesus is invited to stay 2 days within Samaria. And during those 2 days, I don't think he was mute. I think he did a lot of teaching. So of Jesus, our first step always is to build a relationship. Once that you have that relationship, then you have a platform for discussion or for argument in the classic sense of the word. You're going to have somebody that's going to be willing to listen to you, and likewise us listen to them. So yes, I agree. We can't just say, okay, again, we can't slip into that slippery slope of relativism and say, yeah, for the sake of ecumenism, what you believe is all right and what I believe is all right. No, but if we really want to change people, if we really want to evangelize in this new way or even in an old way, you first have to meet people where they're at. You have to break bread with them. You have to develop a relationship with them. That will then make them ready to listen, and that's when we can have our conversations and our discussions. You know what I mean?
Amen. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. That's fantastic. Yeah. Exactly. Like building that platform, like you said. Absolutely. So, Deacon, this has been amazing. I just want to kind of offer you the last word. If you have anything else kind of that you would like to share with our audience, anything about any projects that you have going on, anything about ministries, any lessons, anything that's kind of come up recently in your life that you just want to share for the good of our listeners, anything else?
Well, that's pretty broad, but I guess I would just...
Yeah, I'm giving you a lot of leeway there.
Yeah. I guess I kind of we're kind of where we just ended with, and again, it's just something that I've encountered lately that's really kind of been a burden on my heart, and that's again some of the stuff that I'm seeing on Facebook. And again, I pick my friends. Sometimes again, we don't totally know the other people, but my heart is heavy with a post from a couple of people that I actually know who claim themselves to be Christian, to be Catholic, and some of the hate that I'm seeing out there. And this is definitely a divisive time that we're living in, within the country, particularly with racisms and fears and everything else. And I would just say that we all need to understand, that everybody is God's children. God wants to see everybody in heaven, no matter how different that they are than us, no matter how far outside they are of the Catholic faith. And so once again, to take Jesus' lead. He lays it out very well in the Gospels of how to bring these people to know him. And again, at the sake of being redundant here, it's to first, again, establish a relationship with them that will afford that person the willingness and then the opportunity for them to be open to what you have to say. We're going way backwards if we start out kicking people in the teeth saying, you're different, you're bad. Would Jesus approach it that way? So that's my 2 cents for everybody out there and who might be tempted to put out a snarky post against people that are different from us, and maybe a way to respond to people if you feel similar to me, when you encounter these things, to reach out and again, it's a cliche now, but throw out there, what would Jesus do? How would Jesus approach this?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Exactly. Well said. Well, Deacon, thank you so much for your time. And just want to remind our listeners that the table is the work we've been talking about today. The table, the book of Deacon Dennis Lambert that we're talking to here. He has a website that is available if you'd like to explore kind of some more of his projects and his work. And he mentioned how he's still involved with music too. So his website is deacon-writer.com, so you can find some of his works there. In his ministry, he is a deacon in the Diocese of Phoenix, who has a fantastic bishop. And also, he's just been involved kind of in various ministries, and he continues to work and give talks on evangelization. So, Deacon Dennis, it has been an honor and a pleasure for me to share this time with you. I thank you so much for your insights and your thoughts on these very, very essential topics to our lives today as Catholics and Christians in the world, and how we can make a difference in our day-to-day lives. So I thank you so much for your time. And yeah, it's been great to be with you.
All right. Thank you for having me, Michael.
Okay. All right. Well, just a reminder to all our listeners, this has been a segment of I Thought You'd Like to Know This Too. I am very grateful to be your host again, Michael Horn, coming to you from St. Louis, and Deacon Dennis coming from Phoenix, Arizona. So may God continue to bless all of you who are listening to our station, wcatradio.com, and may God continue to bless you and your families. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.